Hi guys, welcome back to part 2 of our Scratch project. We're carrying on from where we left off last time, which was where we created our background and we programmed our 3 sprites, our tree, our rock and our apple, so that when we clicked the green flag, they moved up the screen. When they got to the top of the screen, they moved back down again. Okay, so they got to the top and then they came right back down and carried on going. Now if you haven't done that bit yet, you need to go back to the first video and make sure you're at that same stage so that we can carry on here from where we've left off at the end of that video. Now if you remember in the last video I said that we are going to use more rocks, we're going to use more trees and more apples, but we're going to create one first so that we can copy it onto the others, so that we haven't got to program the same stuff over and over again. So in this lesson we're going to add on our car, our vehicle, and we're going to hopefully finish programming our trees, our rocks and our apple. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to do our car. So we need to add on our car. Now because we need a car that has a kind of bird's eye view of it, we need to draw our own sprite because there isn't one in Scratch already that uses a bird's eye view. So what we've got is we need to go into our sprite here and we need to actually draw one. So we go to our paint window here and we need to draw a simple vehicle. It doesn't have to be very complicated. You saw mine from the other one was just a rectangular square and a few rectangles for the wheels. One important thing to bear in mind is your drawing window has this little target in the middle of it. That's meant to be the center of your sprite. So when you're drawing your sprite, try to get the middle of your sprite as close to that as you can. So I'm going to start with a simple rectangle for my vehicle. So I'm going to use my rectangle here. I'm going to give it a different colour because obviously I don't want a yellow car on top of a yellow background. So I'm going to come up and I'm going to use a nice red colour for my one. If you want a different outline colour, that's absolutely fine, but you don't have to have one. Okay, so I'm on here now and all I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a rectangle like that. Okay, just simply there, and I tried to keep the centre of mine as close to that as possible. I'm then going to use my rectangle again and I'm simply going to change the colour to black. Sorry, that's my fault. I forgot to unclick my other one, so I'm going to turn it back to red. I'm going to click off it and then draw another rectangle. So when I draw my rectangle this time, I'm going to do it black. So all I'm doing here with the black rectangle is I'm drawing the wheels. So I'm drawing one wheel here, I'm drawing another wheel here at the back, another one here like this, and another one here at the front. Okay, so I've got 4 wheels. You can see my vehicle is already appearing on here, and obviously at the minute it's much too big, but we'll change the size a little bit later. You can take as long as you like drawing your vehicle, but I'm not going to spend ages on it because we want to get on with the coding. The last bit I'm going to use is one last rectangle, so one more rectangle in a different colour so that I can choose, so I can see a sort of window in my car if you like. So all I'm doing is a blue window there to show where the driver might sit. Once I'm happy with my car, once I've done all that, I come back to its coding window. Now first thing I need to do is make sure that my car is the correct size. So I'm going to rescale it just like I did with the trees and the apples to an appropriate size. You'll have to decide for yourself what the appropriate size is for yours. So try a few different ones as you can see I'm doing here and decide which size you think suits your game better. So I'm going to go with that because I feel that's more in line with the size of my rocks and my apples and my tree. Okay, so we're going to do that one there and we're going to make sure that we've got our car there. Now we're actually going to code the car last thing of all, so that's going to be our last thing that we code. We're going to focus this lesson on doing our apple, our rocks and our tree. Now one thing you might want to do here on your costume is label it with a different name if you want to, something like car, because we're going to use a different costume a little bit later, but I'm just going to make sure this one is called car. Okay, so I've got my car there and I've got sprite 1. Now if I want to, I can choose and I can rename this, but because we're only using my car as one sprite here, I could rename it or I can leave it as the same, whichever one you think is easier for you to remember. I personally think renaming it is a little bit easier, but if you don't want to, if you want to leave it as sprite 1, that's absolutely fine. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go back to our trees and we're going to focus on making sure those have all the correct coding in, because at the minute all the tree does is it moves up and comes up and then back to the bottom again. Now it needs to do two things now. It needs to make sure that when it hits the car, if the car ever hits the tree, it takes away one of its lives. Okay, so we need to make sure now that the tree will take away a life from the car if it does that. Before I can take away any lives, I need to come to my variables and I actually need to create some. So I need to create a variable for the lives that the car has, and I need to create a variable for the score that the car has. So I come up here to the make a variable menu. In the name, you just give it a simple name like score there. Leave it on for all sprites and click OK. I've now got one variable called score. I need to make a second variable called lives again for all sprites and click OK. So you can see I've now got two variables. I've got lives and I've got score. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that when the tree hits the car loses one of its lives. Okay, so to do that I need to come back up to my events and I'm going to use another green flag, and I'm going to use another forever from my control section and an if one here. So it's looking very similar to the first block. Okay, so I've got my green flag, I've got forever, and I've got if. Now this is going to be if it touches the car. So I'm going to go to my sensing window and you can see that at the top I've got the touching one here. It's not touching color, it's touching, and at the minute it says mouse pointer. But I'm going to bring that on and I'm going to change it from mouse pointer to the car, because it's the car now. If you didn't rename your car, it will say sprite 1 instead. If I click car now, whatever is in this section of my block is what will happen when it touches the car. Now I want it to lose a life when it touches the car. So to do that, I'm going to go to my variables menu and I'm going to make sure I get change lives. Now if I leave it on change lives by 1, that will actually increase the number of lives. So instead of using the number 1, I need to use -1. So if I change the lives by -1, that means it will subtract 1 from the lives. So at the minute, the tree will, if the tree hits the car, it will subtract 1 life. However, I need to put a small delay in because it subtracts it instantly. So that means all the time the car is touching the tree. So if I put this in here now, you'll see that when my tree passes through my car, for every kind of millisecond that it's touching the car, it will lose a life. So when it touches it, look, you can see that I lost 14 lives just in that short time that it passed through the car. So I need to put a delay in so that every time I hit the tree, he only loses 1 life. So I need to go to my control 1 and I need to put wait in there like that. Okay, and now 1 second's probably enough, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to leave it as 2 seconds. So now you should see this time when the tree goes through my car, instead of losing lots and lots of lives, I should only lose 1 life, which will take me to -29. Like that. So I've done my coding there so that I only lose 1 life each time. Now that is the tree finished. So the trees now are finished. They've only got 1 simple bit of coding. So if you want to, you can now duplicate all your trees. So I'm going to move my car back into the middle and I'm just simply going to copy my tree over and over again. To do that, I right click on the tree and I duplicate it. And I'm going to do that several times. I'm going to do it so I've got 12 trees. Now don't worry about where they appear on the screen for now. As soon as you've done all the duplication, you can move them around. Now remember, what we're trying to do is trying to create some on this side and some on this one, so it creates a kind of corridor for the car to move between. So simply spread your trees out so that they're on either side. Remember, we've done 12, so you need to sort of do 6 on either side. Okay, so 6 trees on either side of the screen. Again, you'll have to test your positioning to check that they're not too close to the middle, but that's up to you. That's how you make your game. So once you've done them like that, if you're happy with the trees, see what they're like, see if they're too close or not, and simply click play. You'll see there that now starts to give the impression that the car is actually moving down the middle of the road. Okay, so the tree's there and now giving that impression that the car is moving down through a corridor of trees as opposed to the trees actually moving up. I'm going to stop there because now we need to move on and we need to look at the rock and the apple, because you can see they're moving correctly, but at the minute, just like the tree, if my car touches the apple or the rocks, nothing will happen at the moment. Okay, now it's a good point here to pause this and make sure that you've got your trees working and copied correctly. Okay, so have a look back at my coding for my tree, check you've got it all working correctly, check that you've copied them and that they all work correctly, and once you're happy with your trees, unpause the video and we'll start to look at the rock. Okay, so if your trees are all working correctly, it's time to move on to the rocks. Now the rock is very similar to the tree. Okay, the rock is really similar to the tree. So similar in fact that we're actually going to take this bit, so I've clicked back onto the tree, we're going to take this bit from the tree and I'm going to copy it into the rock. So now when I click on my rock, look, it's got the exact same blocks of coding on as the tree. So a tree and a rock at the minute look like they've got the exact same code on. So if my car touches the rock, it will lose 1 life, but it will be paused a second so I can't lose more than 1, and then it will carry on. Now the difference for the rocks is just one simple little one. Now when I play my game, you'll see that the trees and the rock and the apple at the moment always stay in the same place. They move up the screen, but they are always in exactly the same place. That makes the game predictable. That means I always know where that rock is going to be, so I can always avoid it, and I can always find the apple because I'll always know where that apple is going to be. It's always going to be in this bit here, so all I have to do is sit there and catch the apple every time. Now the trees not moving is absolutely fine because we're just using the trees to create a kind of border for our game, but we want each time the rock appears at the bottom and the apple, we want them to change places. So we want them to be in a different place each time. So what we need to do is we need to add a little bit of coding so that every time the rock starts from the bottom, it chooses a different point along here to start from. Now to do that, I come back to my original piece of coding. So here, remember, this bit of code, this block here, tells it that when it gets to the top, so when its height gets above 179, it needs to start back at the bottom at minus 180. Now what I need to do is I need to add in one extra bit here. So what I do is I go back to my motion and I'm going to use my set X here. So I use set Y to set the height. I'm using set X to set its horizontal position, so the position along there. Now I want it to be different each time, so if I leave it at minus 58, I haven't solved the problem. It'll still be in the same position every time. So this is where I have to go back to my operators, and in my operators you will see that I have this option to choose a random number, and I've got pick random. So what I do is I drag this in to the set X2 and I pick a random number. Now I have to set which numbers they're between. Now this is where you will have to look at how you've created your game. Okay, so I've put all my trees on like that, and I might have decided that's too narrow an area, so I need to move them over a little bit, or that I might have decided they're okay. But whatever I've decided with my trees, that's the border of my game. I don't want the rocks and the apples to be appearing in the trees. I need them to stay from sort of this area here, so the rock's going to appear from there to about there. Now to find out the numbers I need to use in that random one, okay, I need to come back here, okay, I need to come back here. I've dropped my rock about there, so that's about the left hand side. I might move it a little bit more, and you'll see there I get the X number that I need. So that X number there is the one in the first box here. So I'm choosing my X1, I'm choosing it to be from minus 106, which is there, So I'm going to click in there and I'm going to choose minus 106 for the first number, and to get the second number all I do is move my rock to the far edge here, so it's in line with the edge of the trees, and I look at the next number. So the next number here now is 108, so I change this number to 108. So all I've done is I've checked that side and that side here. So I've moved the rock and it was a minus 106 there and 108 there. So that means now when I press the green flag, the rock will go up, but every time it comes back to the bottom you'll see that it starts in a different place. It picks a random point every time, so it's always different. So I've changed my rock so that instead of appearing in the same place all the time, it's different. Now once you've done that and you've done that correctly, so you've got your random bit there and you've done it, you've worked sure it works correctly, you're ready to copy your rocks. You've finished your rocks. So just as we finished the trees, you're going to copy your rocks. Now when you copy your rocks, it's exactly the same as doing it with your trees. Right click and duplicate, right click, duplicate, right click, duplicate. Now you'll have to decide for yourself how many rocks you want to have on there. Now I'm not going to use as many as the trees. I'm going to stick with 4 rocks because that works quite well for this size car and for this size screen. So when you've put your rocks on, you need to make sure they're nice and spaced out so that you haven't got them all at the same height. So I've got one there, I've got one sort of that height, and then perhaps one more at that height. Okay, if I put them all together, it will create a wall that my car won't be able to get through. So I've spread them out. So now when I play and I click my green flag, you'll see that my rocks start appearing all over the place. So I've now got to move in between wherever those rocks appear and wherever they are on my screen. Okay, you can see they're different every time, and every time I'd have to take a different path through the rocks, so it's not predictable anymore. Once you've done that, your rocks are now finished and you're ready to move on to your apple. So it's another good point here to pause the video, and once you've paused the video, check that you've got your rocks working correctly. Remember, just like with the trees, make sure your rock works perfectly before you copy it, or else what you'll have to do is then go into each rock and correct any mistakes one at a time, so it will take you a lot longer. So always make sure that it works perfectly before you copy it. Once you come back, we'll have a look at the apple. Right, onto the apple then. So if you've followed along so far correctly, your trees are all working correctly and your rocks are all working correctly, your screen's working correctly. Now the last bit we need to do is the apple. Now the apple is different to the rocks and the trees because it's a good thing to hit the apple. It was a bad thing to hit the rocks and the tree because it meant I would lose a life, but it's a good thing to hit the apple. So what I need to do is, just like I did for the rocks, I'm going to use the same bit of code. So I'm going to go to my rocks menu and I'm going to copy the bit where it touches the car over onto the apple. Now because though it's a good thing on the apple, I don't want to change the lives by -1. I want to change the score, and I don't want it to be -1, I want it to be 1 so that it increases. So this means now that if my apple or my car touches my apple, my score will go up by 1. I've left the same wait for 2 seconds on because I want it to make sure that it will not give me loads and loads of scores just for doing the one thing. Okay, so at the minute I'm just going to deliberately move my car into the correct place because remember, we haven't told the apple to go to a different place yet. So I'm going to click my play button, and when the apple hits my car, you should see now that my score goes up. So every time it hits the apple, my score goes up. Again as well, every time I hit a rock, I'm also losing a life. So I've programmed this bit here, but just like we did with the rocks, I need to make sure that my apple goes to a different place each time it starts. So if we look back at the rocks, I need this set X, and I'm going to use the same numbers because it's the same stage, it's the same area. So I'm just going to simply use that exact same bit onto my apple. Okay, so I'm going to go onto my apple, I'm going to go to my motion, I'm going to go to my set x2, then remember I need to use my operators to get my random one, and I'm going to put that in there. And if you look back, if you forget the numbers, remember just look back at the rocks, and it's minus 106 to 108. Remember those numbers might be different on yours depending on what you've chosen to do with your trees, and also the size of your rocks, apples and car and so on. So now when I press the green flag, just like with the rocks, you should see that the apple always chooses a different place to appear. So it still keeps moving up the screen, but it always now chooses a slightly different place to appear. Okay, so what we do, we now need to add one more bit on though, because if my car touches my apple at the moment, what happens is the score goes up, but the apple stays on the screen. It doesn't look like the car has collected the apple very well, so it's not a good visual effect. So we're just going to add on a little bit to make sure that the apple disappears when the car collects it. So I'm going to go to my looks one, and I'm going to go to my show and hide. Remember, show means it's visible, hide means it's invisible. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and bring hide in here, just there. Okay, so hide will mean that now when it touches the car, it will disappear. So my apple's there, so if you watch now, when it hits the car, it should disappear, and it has. The problem is that the apple now hasn't reappeared, so it hasn't come back onto the screen. Now I need to make sure it does come back onto the screen, so what I do is I've used my hide one here, I need to use my show one. So I brought my show one onto the screen, and then I go to here like this and put it in this one. So after it's chosen its random start point, it appears. So we should see now that when it comes back on, the apple appears. So it's showing up and it will appear now. So I'll just stop there because I haven't programmed my car yet to move it. I can't actually control the car at the minute. So what we should see in a second when I press play is that the apple should disappear when it hits the car, but then when it comes time for the apple to get back to the bottom again, the apple should reappear. Disappears, and then the apple reappears again, you'll see. Okay, so we've now finished programming our apple. So we've got our apple here, we've programmed it so that if it touches the car, it hides, it increases the score, then it waits 2 seconds. On our original programming, the apple sets its position on the x-axis to minus 106 to 108 randomly, and then it shows up again. So if it has been made invisible by the car, it shows up again. Once you've got all those correct, you're ready to copy your apple just like we did with the trees and the rocks. So just like we did before, right click, duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. Now you again will have to choose how many apples you want on your game, and just like we did with the rocks, you need to spread them out so they're not all at the same height. Okay, so spread them out so there's an even mix. When you click play now, you should see that you get a good mix of apples and rocks spread out all over the place. Okay, so there you can see that they're all spread out and they always choose a different place to go to. That's the end of this second video. So this video dealt with dealing with the trees, the rocks and the apple. Now what you need to do is make sure you go through all these things to make sure they all work correctly, just as they do on mine. And then once you've got that happy, join in for the next video where we'll be adding the program in for our car to make sure the game actually works properly. Okay, because at the minute the car doesn't do anything, so we can't control the car. So in the next video we'll be looking at the car and how to program it to move, and also to change its costume once it hits a rock or a tree. Okay, right, we'll see you next time.